Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series on partition of India in print media and cinema. So, today we are going to talk about refugee, Desh and nation, a new module. So, before we start discussing on this new topic, we need to understand the definition of refugee. So, there are many critics, many scholars on partition that have worked on the refugees and that define the refugee. So, Uditi Sen refers to the figure of the displaced minority during the partition of India as migrants, refugees, displaced persons, mohajirs and as evacuees. So, these are the common terms or expressions that are used for people that were displaced from one part of the subcontinent to the other, which went on to become a new post-colonial nation state. And so, Uditi Sen says that the centrality of displaced persons in histories of partition is not merely born of the scale and complexity of the refugee crisis unleashed by the hurried division of British India. It is also indicative of a peculiar feature of partition: refugees. The refugees who sought shelter in India and Pakistan in the aftermath of partition claimed to be both refugees and citizens of their putative homelands. This allowed partition refugees to occupy a visible and central place in the post-partition polities of South Asia. So, when we talk of refugee, we need to understand that it is a very complex position, subject position in a new nation state, and it entails a number of reactions by the social group itself and by the non-refugees. So, it is a paradoxical position where the refugee has a lingering past, a kind of a background, a kind of history that bears its weight on his or her identity, and yet the process of bargaining with the nation state is constant. And that is something which defines the journey from being a refugee to becoming a citizen. So, the refuginess is expressed through one's nostalgia for the Desh that one left behind, where one could never go back. So, a journey to a point of no return is something that essentially defines the refugee experience, and also a journey to a new land, a new the host nation state and land. And so, like I said, there is a paradoxical situation or a paradoxical position of the displaced person who does not want to cut off the umbilical cord that attaches, that you know, connects one with the Desh, the homeland where one belongs in terms of lineage, in terms of ancestral property, and yet one wants to establish oneself in the new host land where one has been where one has relocated as a result of the partition. So, when we talk of the refugee worldwide, there are certain popular imaginations and pictures that come to our mind, that of the helpless and the homeless who is in need of rehabilitation. So, photos and descriptions of famished people actually inform the notion of refugee. People in crowds, in groups, in large groups, in railway stations, in camps, enhance the image of the popular image and imaginary of the refugee. So, the very ordinary and mundane acts such as cooking, sleeping, sitting with the family in groups and waiting in the queue for doles, where after the partition these mundane acts such as cooking, sleeping, sitting with the family, waiting in queue went on to become special refugee activities. In other words, whatever the refugees would do, ordinary human acts would become the defining characteristic of the refugee. The mundane activities were being read through the prism of the refugee. So, once what I am trying to get at is that once a person became a part of this social category, refugee, they could hardly be anything else, although they were as humans, as you know, their needs, the basic needs were as ordinary as any other person. Their entire activities would be understood, would be grasped through the prism of refugee and refuginess. So, Ravinder Kaur in her research notes that all previous identities and social distinctions were collapsed, they were in a way conflated, made to disappear, and this process actually constituted the formation of refugee. So, refugee was an archetype of dislocated people in need of resettlement, relocation within the post-colonial citizenry. From refugees, the process of journeying, the process of the journey from refugee to citizenship was also seen as a process of healing of one's body and spirit. So, one realizes that refugee as a term does not harbinger positive meanings, so or positive import. It's a situation from which one needs to come out at the earliest. From not being a refugee anymore is also connoted as a process of having healed, having recuperated, having rebounded, bounced back into normalcy, normal way of life. So, Kaur states that the refugee body for the purposes of policy making is a dispirited male body that can be repaired successfully, while the female bodies remain mostly absent, appearing only to signify the atrocities of sexual violence and abduction by the enemy. So, here we have to understand that implicit in the term, in the social marker refugee, is a specific gender, a specific age, and as we will learn subsequently, also a specific class. Who speaks about the refugee, who gets to speak about the refugee conditions, about the refugee way of existence. It is typically the standard image of refugee is fulfilled by a young male displaced person who is in his prime, not too young to be a juvenile, not too old to be someone that cannot participate in the nation building process. So, it is referring to refugee refers to, typically speaking, it is a young male from a privileged class and caste that gets to speak about the entire refugee experience, and this is something that the critics actually problematize and revisit, because refugee experience is not homogeneous and one, but it is varied, multi-layered, with diverse meanings, diverse existences, diverse experiences. So, Hannah Arendt in her study of totalitarianism in Europe establishes the link between state formation and the flow of refugee. So, how is a nation basically formed? There is certainly a connection between how nation is built through an through a grammar of exclusion, through an act of exclusion. So, nation state lends legitimacy to some at the expense of getting rid of the other. So, one's membership in a nation also means that one is not a member in another nation. One cannot simultaneously belong to different nations. It is a question of allegiance, it is a question of loyalty, of and the process of nation state actually goes on to shape an individual citizen's identity. So, nation state is it facilitates identity formation through categorizing individuals as self and other, people that are part of the nation, the denizens versus the ones that are outsiders. And so, the refugee is someone that was an outsider, that carries the history, the baggage of being an outsider, once being an outsider, that came as a result of political, social upheaval, as a result of historical decisions that came and started dwelling in the host land at a given time period. So, Sajal Nag notes how the divide and rule politics by the colonial state, by the British Raj, followed by decades of communal mobilization, actually logically led to the partition of British India. So, when we talk of the refugee question, we look at the discussions within the Constituent Assembly, which rapidly led to a broad based consensus that the Hindu and Sikh minorities that fled from Pakistan belonged in India. So, in 1950, the refugees' right to belong to India was enshrined in the Constitution. Article 5 allowed citizenship through registration to all such individuals that had migrated to India from Pakistan, provided that they had arrived in India before the commencement of the Constitution. Yet, we see that the influx of the refugees continued well beyond 1950 and informed subsequent discussions on citizenship. So, this is also something that critics have time and again questioned, how we can define the abducted person or the refugee, who is a refugee, who is not, who is a legitimate who is a real claimant, who is a justified claimant to the government's welfare policies or government doles, who is not, and how such definitions of the abducted person and then the refugee can be tied to and bracketed within certain dates. So, people before and after this date do not subscribe to the criteria of being an abducted person or a refugee, although they have experienced the same situation, they although they migrated under similar conditions, if not the same. So, tying the definition to specific dates is something that has been problematized by scholars. The question of refugee belonging re-emerged as a dominant concern in 1955, which molded the texture of the debate around the citizenship bill further. Representatives from West Bengal such as B.K. Das criticize the citizenship bill for demanding a bureaucratic process of registration from the poorer refugees, and more so as this is actually questionable because the destitute refugees in most cases would not possess the necessary papers expected of them. So, instead of in lieu of registration, B.K. Das wanted the bill to provide a definition for displaced persons that would declare all such persons as citizens of India. Now, Pandit Pant of the United Provinces had a different take. He insisted that registration was indeed necessary in order to avoid confusion, and yet he clarified that the citizenship bill did not propose to endow partition refugees with a new right or was not meant to monitor their eligibility for citizenship. So, India's citizenship bill formally acknowledges the contradictory category of the citizen refugee. So, refugees as a category remain an oxymoron where and this is something we are going to talk about more in our subsequent lectures, where the memory from a homeland left behind greatly shaped their culture, their psyche, and yet there is constantly a struggle to establish themselves in the present, in the current situation, in the current geopolitical space. So, there is a dealing with a temporal spatial reality left behind and a temporal spatial reality that they inhabit in the present. So, there is a kind of interesting interaction between the two, which churns out the identity of the refugee. We will also see, we will also note how the refugee experience, like I said, is heterogeneous, diverse, and there is a class caste connection. The class and caste of of a given refugee determines how much they can lay claim on and how much they can celebrate their culture from the land that they left behind. So, it has been researched and argued that refugees from the upper echelons, rather immigrants, could celebrate and maintain, celebrate, preserve the cultures that they had inherited from their homeland, from their Desh. We see this in both sides of the border. For example, re-establishing their family business in the host land, and through the name of the shop, one commemorates the land that one belongs to, the land that one comes from. So, in Calcutta, for example, there are so many business enterprises, establishments, commercial enterprises that are named after Dhaka. So, the elite immigrants are capable of celebrating, commemorating the past, that they celebrate and commemorate their roots we see similar, say, commemoration on the western side, in Punjab, where people name their shops, their enterprises after Lahore, after Rawalpindi, so places that their ancestors actually came from. So, and yet on the other hand, the Dalit refugees cannot really afford to do that. They so celebration of one's ethnicity, of one's culture, of one's specific linguistic ethnic belonging is greatly boosted by economic surplus, economic economically advantaged position. Not everyone can do that. The Dalit refugees tend to merge with, in a way, camouflage with the host land's culture. They are not, in commonly speaking, they are not very assertive about their culture, their Desh that they left behind, their language. They try to merge and unlearn, in a way, unlearn about their Desh. We see that refugee is not a homogeneous identity, but respond in different ways to the macro schema, the ongoings in the nation, and the micro factors affect the refugee's decision in settlement, and so the larger factors affect the refugee's decision in settlement and in constructing the experiences and identities of the refugees. So these factors include policies and measures taken by the government, the geographical conditions of migration, then the caste and class affiliation, all of which combine to form the refugee experience. So, Holborn gives us the definition of refugee. According to Holborn, the refugee is an involuntary migrant, a victim of politics, war or natural catastrophe. So, every refugee is naturally a migrant, but not every migrant is a refugee. Difference between the two is based on whether someone's movement is voluntary. So, for refugees, the push factor becomes important or becomes dominant. It determines their displacement. Push factor meaning something that has an unpleasant event, a political happening that propelled them to shift, to move their base from one nation state to another. So, that is a push factor, versus there are alleged pull factors where a person moves to another land in search for greener pastures. So, for socioeconomic upward mobility, one chooses to become citizen in another nation. That is the pull factor. So, in the case of India, in the case of the partition of India, the push factor largely determined the displacement of displacement of a large population from belonging to different communities. So, Pablo Bose notes that the notion of two unified homogeneous monolithic communities, Hindu and the Hindus and the Muslims, and their relationship as co-religionists is profoundly inaccurate, and such imagination actually invisibilizes so many other people that are also coexisting in the subcontinent. So, it does a great disservice to the cultural, linguistic, ethnic and religious differences, and thereby the complex multi-layered texture that defines India, or that defines South Asia. So, for example, when we talk only about these two communities, and even the decision of partition that gave undue importance, that in a way amplified the presence of these two communities, such treatment, such undue visibility being rendered to only to the Hindus and the Muslims happen at the expense of failing to recognize that other communities also exist, people such as the Jains, the Sikhs, and so many other tribal groups. So the process of the construction of a self based on assumption of homogeneity had actually led to the formation of Pakistan, and yet one realized that the Muslims, which I keep repeating in so many, I have already stated this in my earlier lectures, the Muslims in South Asia are not a monolithic group, a homogeneous group, and this is something realized through further tearing away of Bangladesh from Pakistan on the grounds of a separate ethnicity, separate culture and separate language. So, besides redrawing the geophysical structure of a state, partition permanently damaged the psychological and cultural matrix of the people. For example, the partition engendered a permanent refugee crisis in South Asia, a permanent refugee crisis that remained open-ended and unresolved to a great extent. So, some of the popular colloquial terms that one uses for the refugee in South Asia, such as Udbastu, Sharanarthi, Bastuhara, and then there are terms such as for the Bengalis, there is a term called Bangal. For the Punjabis, there is the term called Mohajir, and then Bohiragato, Bideshi. For the Hindus, the Muslims use a term which could be read as a slang, it is Malaun. All these terms became part of daily vocabulary in the refugee absorbent states. It brings, I mean, it tells us about the gaze of the natives and also the counter gaze. It leads to the question of the gaze by the native populace on the refugees and the counter gaze, and there is a point where these terms are being owned. It echoes the black movement or the feminist movement, the radical feminist movement, where the abusive terms are owned and become a point of strength for a given social group. So, people say, yes, I am a black, I am a whore or a slut. So, it is a response to slut shaming. In the same way, people would say in Bengal, for example, there was a very powerful slogan formed by the refugees, Amra Kara, Bastuhara. Who are we? We are refugees. We are the ones that have lost our lands, our homelands. So the refugees soon discovered the issue of identity as being something very, very complex and multiple. And so in the process of transformation, the concept of self would often shift from religious to linguistic to cultural and economic, such that the political space and identity of the refugee became really complicated and nuanced. It was never, I mean, it is very difficult in the South Asian context, it is very difficult to put the case and the question of the refugee in a straitjacket. So, onus of a successful transition from refuginess to citizenship lay in one's resourcefulness, depending on how much of social, economic, cultural capital one brought with oneself, one would be successfully rehabilitated, resettled in the new land. So, the core principle of official resettlement policy was self-rehabilitation, and the populace, the section of immigrants that could self-rehabilitate themselves were seen as the assets of the host land, assets in the host land. They were not seen as economic or social abusers. Otherwise, they were pejorative expressions or pejorative ideas associated with refugees. There were some, in the common parlance, refugees would be would be described as people that did not constructively contribute to the making of the post-colonial society. So, a study of Bengal shows how an authentic refugee type within the state discourse was fashioned after the Punjab experience, and yet this was a fiasco, since the frame of Punjab, the process of partition in Punjab, and the process of more so the process of rehabilitation, and resettlement in Punjab hardly informed and hardly fitted the reality of Bengal. In Bengal, the notions of refuginess, the understanding of refuginess lay outside the strict meanings or the strict definitions that were etched at that time. So, in Bengal, when we look at the case of Bengal, we realize that there ought to be, the case of Bengal entails dissolution and redefinition of the term refugee, because of a very different process of displacement, a very different process of immigration, the reality where one sees that Bengali refugees keep trickling across a porous border, a border that was never sealed because of the Nehru-Liaquat Pact. And so, the definition falls short, the strict meanings of refuginess fall short to contain the case of Bengal. We will talk more about this, and I will meet you again with another topic and another lecture. Thank you.